All right, we are recording live, and today we have another awesome guest here, and he has a master's degree in biological science and is a research and engagement officer for the Ancient Forest Alliance, which is pretty awesome. Gotta love those big trees. So please welcome Ian Thomas to Impact today. Dev is hopefully popping in here in a sec. He's kind of MIA for a few minutes here, but hopefully he pops in. And again, if you like what we're doing, please share and subscribe to Impact. We really appreciate it, because what we do is we share great stories and great causes around the world that people are engaging in. And the more you share, the more that the word gets out. And also, this episode is sponsored by the Pachamama Alliance, empowering Indigenous people of the Amazon rainforest to preserve their land and their culture. So, before we get started, what we do here is we do something called Two Truths and a Lie. And so I'm going to go into that now. So, hey, Ian, so how's it going? I'm going to hit you with some two truths and a lie. So everything good today?
Everything's great. Yeah.
Fantastic. So, okay, I'm going to do a couple of these two truths and a lie here. So number one, Ian has seen more albatrosses than there are humans in Vancouver and Victoria combined. Oh my gosh. That's crazy. I'm wondering, is that like all in one spot or not? Okay. Second, Ian considers cows to be the most frightening of all animals he has encountered. Okay, that's an interesting one on a bunch of different fronts. Okay, and number three, in addition to his conservation work, Ian enjoys writing novels. His most recent manuscript, entitled 407 Years from Now, describes the dystopic, I don't know if I got it right. Dystopic future world awaiting us in the year 2109. Wow, I just watched Dune last night with my wife, and that kind of put my head right back into that. That was an awesome movie. I love Dune. That was really cool. Mm-hmm. So I have to get Devin usually and I guess which one here. So let me see. Which one is the lie? So I would think, the albatrosses. I know you've traveled. I read your bio and you've traveled a heck of a lot. Albatrosses or cows. Now, cows on many fronts.
And I just wanted to emphasize, I've hung out with crocodiles, bears, wolves, venomous snakes, and sharks. So it's not just like a tour of the farmyard kind of thing.
Yeah, I know. I saw that, and so I believe your book. I believe your book or manuscript. So you're writing. I believe that sounds really cool. I'm going to read that. That sounds awesome. If it's true. I'm going to say the albatrosses. The albatrosses is the lie. You've seen more albatrosses than humans in Victoria and Vancouver combined. So how did I do there?
I actually think I've seen more albatrosses than I have seen humans. That was a hard one for me to decide, because I've seen certainly over 1 million albatrosses. I've been to two of their greatest capitals, which is Midway Island and Laysan Island. Midway had over 1 million breeding pairs. And Laysan has certainly in the many hundreds of thousands of breeding pairs, plus auxiliary non-breeding birds. So I've been to other cities, but I don't really think I've seen that many humans that I could have sort of cognitively, but I felt I was a little overshot. But yeah,
all in one gathering, I guess. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Right? Just few dozens of acres, and the whole thing is just like this vast, booming community of albatrosses. Yeah.
Wow. And that's in Midway. It would be
Midway and then Laysan Island. Yeah.
Laysan Islands. Wow. That's amazing. And it's interesting what you said about the cow. Now, the cow, I took that. I looked at as dangerous as in what? Like dangerous in many ways. Like, 'cause I was, we were with our family down in Ecuador and with the Amazon. We were the Pachamama Alliance that were sponsoring this. And we did we have a foster child down in Ecuador. So we were going to visit him. And he was down on the coast, and we were coming up over the Andes and down the other side, down to the coast. Then we came back up over the Andes, we're going back to Quito and down, and we went through the cloud forest. So we're coming out of this beautiful cloud forest, which is like a a high altitude jungle, I guess,
Oh yeah,
with
yeah.
with the clouds. And we're coming down, and we're with our friend called Danielle, and he's going, "Oh, the cloud forest is amazing." It went on and on and on and on, and then it stopped. We got a little bit lower, and it stopped, and it all became grazing for
Hmm.
cattle. And he said, just like, I don't know if this is what you meant. The most dangerous animal on the planet is the cow, meaning that we're cutting down rainforests all over the world to create grazing pastures for these for cows and
Hmm.
sheep and whatever it is, but mostly cows. And so when you had that in there, I'm like, oh, is that what he's alluding to? I'm not really sure, but
That secondary meaning, I think it's a more profound reading, and I think
mm,
it's accurate. This
mm,
is much more just visceral, though. This was actually also in the cloud forest in Colombia
oh,
when I stayed there, and we were working in the shade-grown coffee forests there, looking
mhm.
at bird communities in those beautiful, like towering forests that just have coffee under them.
Yeah,
And
beautiful.
I had to pass through this pasture to get there, and the cows there, they would just close in on me. And you really realize you are so small. You had to really be aggressive to them. It was sort of like you had to really push them or they would start pushing you. And, this is an animal that's, many 10 times my size. And I think that's a general thing that I feel like carnivores, they're kind of cowardly, right? They don't, for them, an injury is just the worst thing, right? You have to chase down and get your prey. If you've got an injured foot, your ability to do that is severely compromised, right? So if you can
Mhm.
convince a cougar or a wolf or a shark or whatever that like you're not a good thing to eat, they're like, okay, I don't want to risk that, right? Like they really want a sure thing. But I mean,
Exactly.
like ungulates, like herbivores, they just beat the crap out of each other, right? Like, they don't they can chase grass anytime, right? Like, it's not very hard to get that. So I
Right.
feel like those animals, you know, I can convince a carnivore, if I'm a large human. Now,
Mhm.
maybe like, I mean, a tiger or a saltwater crocodile is pretty horrifying. Like, you may not be able to win that
Yeah. Yeah.
discussion, but like the majority of like a cougar or wolf or something, like you can convince them that you're not a good candidate to eat. But convincing a cow or an elk or a bison that you're a poor candidate to fight, well, you don't weigh 2,000 pounds. Like you're not gonna like it's a very different world. So
Yeah.
certainly in terms of just like pit of my stomach fear, cows have done it for me in a way that none of the more toothy animals have yet
Yeah.
managed to accomplish.
That's interesting. I know, because yeah, we all fear, like, we're forced, we're forced. We're fortunate that we live fairly close to the forest here, and I'm always
Mm-hmm.
out in the bush, and I'm always like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, because the cougars, you can't, here they're very stealthy. Bears, yeah, whatever, they don't really bother me too much. You see lots of bears,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't realize, like, the deer. You get these deer in certain seasons. Like, I've been stopped. My
Mm.
wife and I were walking our dog, and we were stalked by a deer. Like, the thing was like and it's just like following us. We couldn't get it to go away, and it was like this thing's going to like attack us.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't very big. It was like a smaller deer, but the thing was just it was actually tracking us, which was a bit
Wow.
spooky. It was weird. Yeah.
And you kind of don't know what the etiquette is. Like for a predator that's tracking you, okay, well, I'm going to be big and I'm going to be loud, but for an ungulate like that, like I don't know, do I want to just curl
I
up in a
know.
ball? Like, what do I say? Like,
Yeah.
if I'm big and loud, does that just antagonize it? And then I have to deal with this, 1,000 kilograms of, a juggernaut basically. Like it's yeah, they're intimidating.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the example you brought up of the environmental damage for cattle is,
Hmm.
I think, much more, I think, a sophisticated reading of it. But in terms of just clench your gut in fear kind of thing, the cow has so far um,
Yeah.
done it for me the most.
Yeah, turn it around and then put horns on it and make it a bull, and it's 10 times worse. Those guys
Yeah, yeah.
that run with the bulls. I have a friend that goes running with the bulls in Pamplona, or wherever it is in
Yeah,
Spain, like every
yeah.
every couple of years. And yeah, that's just kind of,
Oh,
it's
yeah.
probably a little bit more dangerous than you would think.
Oh, yeah.
I just like,
I think if you're in the wrong, oh,
yeah,
nightmare.
yeah, yeah. You're gored. You're gored. So the Ancient Forest Alliance is tell us a little bit about what you guys do, because now we're talking about animals and things that kind of, some of them live in the forest, some of them
For
are
sure.
now living out because the forest has all been cut down and they're grazing. But yeah, tell us a little bit about what you guys do.
Yeah, so we're an advocacy group and we
Mhm.
focus on the old growth forest ecosystems of British Columbia with a special emphasis on those incredibly globally rare temperate rainforests that you find both on the coast but also in the inland rainforest, which is this actually globally unique phenomenon where you have an interior wet belt of rainforest extending all the way along the kind of the trough of the Rocky Mountains. And these forests are incredibly endangered. They're incredibly ecologically important and important from a climate perspective,
Mhm.
and they're magnificent. They just
Yeah.
they're they're among the most charismatic places in the world.
Yeah.
And what we do is we very much try and build a broad-based coalition for protection. So we reach out to a variety of different kinds of groups and interests. We've reached out to pulp workers, to forestry workers, as well as to tourist organizations, chambers of commerce, just to create that really, we really believe that you've got to kind of go outside your echo chamber when it comes to
Mhm.
conservation. That it's very simple to kind of just say the things that all us enviros want to hear, right? The people who are already kind of in the tank, in the choir. But
Mhm.
to see that kind of lasting societal change, we really believe in cultivating relationships with a wide variety of groups. And then we sort of mobilize those groups to engage with the government, engage with also even logging corporations, but especially with sort of the federal and really most of the provincial government to um, articulate a vision for ancient forest conservation in BC and to try and really advocate for some concrete policy changes for ancient to secure old growth forest protection.
And then there's, I mean, there's the extreme importance of these old growths, like these big old trees being able to, suck carbon out of the
Mm-hmm.
atmosphere. Is that correct? Like, because I know the second growth forest, we have these spindly trees that are all second growth forest, and that's great. But the old growth, there's something special about them and their ability
For
to,
sure.
right?
Yeah. I mean, as you say, a tree in its
Mm.
most basic fundamental wet form is a machine for extracting carbon from the
Right,
atmosphere, right? So
right.
we have this enormous problem. The air is full of carbon, or more full than it should be, and there's this machine that removes it. And yeah, as you say about the size, right? You plant a
Mm.
little seedling, and that's going to be great for people in 50 to 100 years, but you're planting it to become an old growth tree because the difference between a little, seedling and a giant tree, one's a teaspoon and one's a fire hose, right?
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
And it's not just though what they're doing right in the moment, right? Because an old growth forest is a carbon bank, right? If you're seeing a giant tree,
Mm.
50% of that tree is made of carbon, right?
Hmm.
Well, that carbon only came from one place. It came from the air. And when you kill that tree, that's where it's going to go back again. So the tree is also what's important is it is a giant bank of historical carbon. In that way, it is comparable to a coal mine or an oil field, right? Which is also just plants again, right?
Hmm.
It's the same thing. A carbon is just a very old tree.
Stored
So,
carbon, yeah.
so well, basically, what an old growth forest represents is 500, 600, 1,000 years of accumulated atmospheric carbon. And when we log that, about 60% of that is lost in the atmosphere right off the bat. So you have this giant vessel of carbon, and you just turned it upside down, right? And you say, okay, we'll plant a bunch of trees. Okay, but it's going to take them centuries to just recapture what you lost when you pitched the whole thing over. So we're just sort of saying, like,
Mm.
don't tip that over. Like let's, these are these banks of carbon. And there's a really amazing new study that came out just a few months ago, and
Mm.
it looked at the whole world's bank of irrecoverable carbon. And they said 50% of the planet's irrecoverable carbon is found on about 3% of the planet's surface. So we are one of the most carbon dense ecosystems. You can actually lock in and protect about 50% of that essential sort of biologically, ecologically held carbon only by protecting about 3% of the planet, which
Mm.
shows you here in BC, we sort of see this as a very local issue, right? Like protect our old growth forests. But they're
Yeah.
really also the world's old growth forests, right? Like these are literally the most carbon dense ecosystems on Earth, more even than the tropical rainforests. So the tropical rainforests have more diversity of life, but in
Mhm.
terms of just sheer locked carbon, nothing compares to the temperate rainforest of Western North America.
Wow. Yeah, that's that's really interesting because we go hiking. I go hiking behind the house here. I go hiking up at Whistler. I go hiking wherever
Mm-hmm.
it is, and pretty much all of it's in second growth forest, right?
Yeah.
And especially behind our house, I'm a Mount Frome in North Vancouver here,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
just a great hiking and mountain biking mecca.
Oh yeah.
And right, and but it's all this old growth forest, but it's kind of, it doesn't look that healthy in there. Mount Seymour looks a little bit more healthy than Mount Frome and Grouse
Mm-hmm.
Mountain area. It just almost looks like, I call it Mordor when I go in there. It's a little bit kind of that dark, and it's all
Oh
the
yeah.
trees are very close together,
Yeah.
and there's
Mm-hmm.
lots of massive stumps that have been
Yeah.
cut down, 80, 90,
Tombstones.
100 years ago.
Yeah.
I love it. Yeah, tombstones. That's true. And and I sit there and I imagine what it would have been like, 100, 150 years ago with the indigenous people in
Mm-hmm.
the area here, walking between these behemoth, massive trees with everything spread out and the light coming through and the wildlife everywhere. Now it's like Mordor, and we call that, well, we cut them down, but we replant. Everything's cool. We're good. It's like, guys, no. Have you ever actually been into one of your forests that you've actually replanted afterwards? It's not the same. And
No.
like you said, I mean, those massive trees bringing down the carbon and bringing the CO2, and it's really, yeah. I really don't get it. And over the years, I do a lot of work in Asia, so I fly
Mm-hmm.
from Vancouver up over, up the coast here, up over Alaska, and then we go down over, I guess, Russia and Japan, and then end up wherever we're going. And just the carpet of the logging that's gone on, all the patchwork, I guess you call it patchwork, all the way up the coast. And there's little facades in the front along the roads to make it look like behind here it's a beautiful forest, but actually, no, it's just a facade of a few trees that are left. And it's absolutely shocking how much of our province has been logged. You know.
It is. We have this image of this kind of untapped frontier that we're sitting on. And as you say, a lot of it, there's just this kind of facade there.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate what you said about the difference
Mm,
between second growth and old growth. And that I think is rare for
mm,
people to have that kind of ecological literacy to notice that, because
mm,
people sort of have this view like, oh, well, just plant it up, right? And it's this, as you say, it's this kind of hollowing out of the landscape, right? All those
yeah.
young trees, they're basically a plantation.
Yeah.
And, it's almost like an oil, not quite like an oil palm, but it's getting there. And
Well,
they
yeah,
just
yeah. It
create
actually,
this
yeah, you're right.
screen.
Hmm.
And so, as you say, I mean, what you're observing, has been demonstrated scientifically. There's about 90% less shrubs in a second growth than an old growth forest, and about 95% less forbs. And so, if you think about all the creatures whose their budget depends on that light reaching, their basic kind of like living nutritional budget
Hmm.
depends on the light reaching the forest floor. Like a deer is a good example.
Yeah.
Um, if your budget, if you cut 90% out of your paycheck, your ability to fund your groceries is going to be really limited. And so,
Hmm.
for instance, on Vancouver Island, deer have crashed 75%. So we hear people kind of, say, oh, there's all these deer in Oak Bay or in Victoria, eating tulips. But across most of the island, basically that deer habitat has been completely hollowed out. And
Yeah.
so they're at a fraction of their historical populations. And that is really bad news for those carnivores that are higher up there. So
Hmm.
we think cougars have declined by about 70% as well. So it's not just, the old growth forests are beautiful for sure.
Hmm.
They're lovely. But what I frequently try and emphasize is like not just the ornamental value, but the instrumental value.
Hmm.
That they are these giant machines for ecological health.
Yes.
And even if you can't visit them way up a valley somewhere, right, way up, Fairy Creek or Upper Walbran, they're up there working. They're up there creating the conditions for a healthy ecosystem and a healthy planet. And so,
Hmm.
we really want to emphasize that, it's not just protect a sort of a beautiful little tree museum. It's, protect the insulation and copper wire in your wall. Like, don't rip that out and sell it. Don't sell the wheels on your car. Like, you'll get money right this second,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you're not going to have a functional home. And when you think about those atmospheric rivers, the floods,
Yeah.
the way in which even climate, right? These forests are so important as like a vaccine against climate change, right? To get
Hmm.
that CO2 out. But of course, we know now, climate change is here. Like we're gonna try and buffer ourselves against the worst of it, but we also have to deal with what is baked into the cake already.
Yeah.
And old growth forests, they're these sort of climate refugia. Research has found some really
Hmm.
interesting work with birds that there's a summer heat wave. The old growth forest is about 2 degrees cooler than the second growth forest. And so birds that are suffering from that heat wave, they have this kind of little refuge in an ancient forest. And that's going to be the same story, especially for salmon that need that
Hmm.
cold, clean water. So basically, from a very relevant COVID example, old growth forests are the vaccine. They're pulling that carbon out, but they're also the treatment. They're also what we're going to need when we deal with that intensifying global warming, these huge agents of ecosystem stability. They are like a stabilizing force on the
Hmm.
landscape. So they're kind of a two for one, kind
Yeah.
of silver bullet for
And
the
also
health.
the also I noticed it's really interesting that you said that, because when I go hiking, these forest fires have become horrific in the past several years. Just
Yeah.
horrific in the summers because our temperatures are going up and the winds and everything. But when I do walk through here, I notice some of the old growth trees, they're still there. They've
Hmm.
survived many, many massive forest fires because you can see the bark layers that are black and they've been
Yeah.
scorched and whatever. So they can survive. These guys can survive this stuff. This second spindly growth, it just goes woof and it's gone. And like I was saying before, when I go hiking and I go biking
Hmm.
behind the house here, one of the best mountain biking and hiking places in the world. um there's I very, very little, like you said, animal life in there. Like I very rarely see a deer. I'm riding up Mount Frome. I don't see I see them on the road.
Hmm.
I see them, eating people's, flowers and things, but I never see them out in the bush there in a second growth forest. But
Hmm.
then when I ride, I'll go about 12 kilometers up the Seymour Dam area. There's an old growth section in there of some beautiful old growth trees. And I go up there all the time and I sit and I just chill out. And they're massive, but there's so much stuff going on there. The creeks and the moss and the different types of life and the squirrels and all these things they're all in that little pocket. But in the second growth, I very rarely see like anything. It's
Yeah, and that's
you're
really
so
astute, I
right.
think. And what you're saying about the fire, I think, what you're saying there is a really apt observation that reflects the research. Again, as you're saying, those, especially those ancient Douglas firs,
Yeah.
deep, corky bark, right? Like they're basically wrapped in a natural asbestos.
Protected.
And research has found that the fire intensity is far worse in second growth forests than in old growth, because as you say, a second growth, that young plantation, we want to space it so we can access all those trees, right? We're creating a system of just this tightly packed uh, bunch of little trees that we, industrially think is an improvement on nature, right? Because we can just go in
Hmm.
there and just mow them down. Well, the fire can do the same thing, right? It can just liquidate all that timber. Whereas, yeah, those older forests with their gappy canopies, they've got the brush that burns, right? But
Yes,
that's a
a
much
lower
low, it's a
brush. Yeah.
much low intensity fire compared
Hmm.
to the fuel loading you get from that densely stocked second growth forest. So, yeah,
Yeah.
we're less of a fire system further to the west. Like Vancouver area probably gets them every couple hundred years. Somewhere like Tofino, probably never, or like 3,000 years. But for
Yeah.
sure,
Yeah.
as you go
The
towards the
humidity.
interior or further south, those older forests are actually more fire resistant. It's sort of an irony, I guess. And when we log, we target the most fire resistant trees, right? We target the big old ones that, as you say, have endured that. And so they've endured a whole lot, right? They're also the ones that are genetically the best adapted to survive and thrive over all the perturbations they've seen, right? A
Hmm.
tree 1,000 year old, it has seen droughts, floods, it's seen little ice ages.
Yeah.
It has that kind of genetic toolkit to cope. And so as we like snip those out of the system as well, we're really we're really diminishing the resilience of that ecosystem.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Wow.
I appreciate your
Well,
firsthand
so
observations there, because it's so accurate to what we found from the more
yeah, it's
academic
just
side as well.
yeah, I mean, it's shocking because we spend a lot of time out in the trees. My wife and I, we've been. I mean, COVID has had a bunch of positive things as well as the negative stuff.
For sure.
It's
Yeah.
we've been outside. I mean, we're outside a lot, but we're outside even more than normal. We're hiking probably every day for 2-3 hours, almost every day, in all the different areas, and we really noticed just noticed a lot more just in the ecosystems. We just really slowed down and paid attention as opposed to rushing and getting your workout
Right.
and running back
Yeah.
home and I'm done my workout and just the forest as a backdrop. Well, now we actually really immersed ourselves in the forest and just took our time exploring, and it was life changing. Like it really helped with my health, and it helped with my anxiety and all this other stuff, and just spending time in the forest, and it's incredible. So I just gonna ask you. So I think the government of Canada was it in 2021, they said they would double the amount of protected areas from 12% up to 25% by 2025. I'm just wondering, like, are they on track for that? How are we doing? Because we're 2022. That's a year, a
Hmm.
year. Yeah.
Yeah. So what makes that complicated is the federal
Mhm.
government doesn't actually have much power over the land base, right?
Right.
So unlike, say, in the States, where the federal government actually owns much of the western states, at least, like
Hmm.
they control vast areas of Alaska, Washington, Oregon, right? Because those are sort of territories they acquired. Here, because of Confederation, the provinces entered the Confederation of Canada with a fair amount of control over their land base. So the feds only really own and control military bases, basically, and national parks. So they're basically freeing up a huge amount of funding,
Hmm.
but it's on the provinces to respond to that and actually create the parks, or ideally the indigenous protected areas
Mm.
that would be so essential to meeting that goal. And unfortunately, what's going to happen, or what does happen, if the provinces don't respond, is the federal government is going to sort of look at like a hectarage thing, right? You can protect a lot of Canada and only focus it on the least biodiverse areas, right? So the Arctic
Yeah.
ecosystems and the northern ecosystems, they are incredibly important. They're important for a lot of reasons. I would never say like forget the Arctic, right?
Mhm.
However, the most biodiversity in Canada is going to be found further to the south, right? In those richer, warmer climates. So you're going to have the Carolinian forests of Ontario that are just almost like a jungle, snapping
Mm.
turtles and all sorts of crazy snakes and birds and things. You've got those southern prairies, right? That kind of almost Serengeti of, bison and prairie dogs and badgers. And then you've got the temperate rainforest in British Columbia, as well as the Okanagan, the Pocket Deserts there as well. And so what we're trying to do, and this is actually Ken Wu's secondary organization, right? So we have the Ancient Forest
Yeah.
Alliance, which he co-founded, which focuses laser focused on old growth forest. But then the Endangered Ecosystem Alliance, which I think you've talked to Ken about,
Yeah.
is
I
actually
did.
focused on those sort of equivalents all across the country. What are those
Mm.
highest productivity ecosystems that unfortunately are also the ones that we want, right? We are less interested in a rock scarp, 900 meters up a cliff, right? We're interested in the richest veins of the landscape, which is also what all the creatures are, right? And
Mm.
indigenous people would have been or are as well. So has colored conservation history, right? Historically, we set aside a lot of rock and ice, and we set aside very little of the lowland productive systems that we want to make use of. And so the province or the feds might be able to set aside 30% of the country
Hmm.
pretty easily, but not have to really make those representative of the actual diversity of ecosystems we have in Canada. So what we're
Mm.
trying to do is focus that attention. We're trying to say, for sure, Arctic and boreal systems are very important, but so are temperate rainforests, so are grasslands, so are Carolinian forests. And so the success of the government will, I think, hinge on them not being allowed to take the easiest way out, to not
Mm.
set aside what is non controversial, basically. Because
Hmm.
if we want it, as humans, as an industrial society, it's a very good chance that that's because there's an ecological richness that should also be considered from a conservation perspective.
Right. Okay. So I'm actually, you know what I'm going to do? I forgot I've got some photographs I'm going to share here. How do I?
Oh wow, yeah, you've got a whole
I got
slideshow
about.
here.
Can you actually see this here?
I can, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, cool. So okay, so what do we do? And I know Ken the other day um he was talking about financing and what we're gonna what can we do to help protect I know he's talking about the ecosystems. We're now narrowing it down to the old growth forest. So what can we do to help
Yeah.
protect? I'm just going to keep rolling through. So people that are listening, I'll describe a little bit about what's on the screen here. But
Hmm.
we have a photograph here of I was going to say Ken, of Ian, of Ian beside a beautiful old growth tree somewhere here too. So yeah.
Yeah, so you're wondering about the solutions, and that's something that, of course, we are most invested in, right? We
Mm-hmm.
want to see a meaningful change here. And so one of the biggest issues is that, oh, it's beautiful Sitka spruce forest there. One
Yeah.
of the biggest issues is that in local communities are deeply embedded or can be embedded in traditional forms of resource extraction.
Mm-hmm.
And to have an equitable transformation, right? We want to see a forest industry whose stated philosophy has
Mm-hmm.
been liquidate all available old growth and convert to plantations. That was the official philosophy of it, right?
My
We
God.
want to
Wow.
see them transform that perspective to see
Mm-hmm.
these other values of old growth.
Mm-hmm.
But we also recognize that many communities are dependent on revenues, and that in order to make this an equitable transition, the
Mm-hmm.
government needs to provide economic alternatives. And those
Mm-hmm.
economic alternatives might need to be kind of supplemented as well by philanthropic or private sector work as well.
Right.
So we're particularly concerned about, focused on First Nations communities
Mm-hmm.
because they are the unceded title holders to basically all the old growth forest in British Columbia. And the government has made Indigenous involvement, which we agree with and support, um, uh, integral to
Mm-hmm.
their conservation work on old growth forests.
Right.
However, many of these First Nations groups do have their own resource investments in old growth forest, and they may have revenue sharing agreements as well with timber companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so we feel very strongly, and we argue that there needs to be an economic incentive to help these communities transition away from this traditional old growth extraction model
Mm-hmm.
to an economy that maybe has second growth logging integrated there, as well as value added processing of that, not just shipping giant logs overseas, right? But actually
Mm-hmm.
creating a higher value product, which has a larger economic return here, but also other kinds of industries like tourism,
Mm-hmm.
as well as you can have different kinds of sustainable aquaculture and other non-extractive forest-based economic activity. So mushroom harvesting,
Yeah.
botanicals, essential oils. There can be quite a variety. And that
Mm-hmm.
is a way also for these communities to really kind of hopefully get out of this boom and bust that is so associated with an extractive economy,
Sure.
right?
Yeah.
If you go in there, take all the old growth,
Yeah, like
you've
here.
limited what it can give your community to this sort of single bonanza, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I mean, if you have a beautiful tourist trail through an old growth forest, you can also be harvesting botanicals from that. You can also be doing a variety. You can be potentially getting carbon credits as well as a financial addition. So
Yeah.
we feel this is not only, of course, the most important ecological step, but it's also a really valuable economic diversification for these communities.
Mm-hmm.
But there needs to be that initial injection of funding to really get these economic alternatives developed.
Yeah.
And so that's what our Nature Based Solutions Foundation is
Mm-hmm.
really focused on, right? The Ancient Forest Alliance, which I'm primarily a part of, we're on the advocacy front. We're raising awareness and we're pressuring the government, but we see that there's this need for a financing strategy as well. And the nature
Mm-hmm.
based solution is trying to fill that gap at the same
It's
time as trying to leverage and bring in funding, as you say, from the federal government, as well
mhm.
as from the provincial government.
Right, right. Now I'm just gonna go back, I guess. Oh, where's my thing
Oh, I
here?
love that black bear
There's
picture.
the bear. See, this is old growth, right? Yeah,
Oh yeah.
you wouldn't get this stuff in second growth going on
Well,
like
for
that.
black bears especially, those
Yeah,
ancient red cedars, they're basically like pretty much every black bear in the coastal rainforest uses those cedars for their denning, and then where they also have their
yeah,
young.
yeah.
And even those stumps that you probably see all over the North Shore,
Hmm.
they'll even use those when they have to. So
Yeah,
they'll be burrowing down into those huge castle stumps, right where those old springboarders had to get way up, 10 feet
yeah,
up a stump.
yeah.
So those
Wow.
are actually, even like 100 years after the logging event, these bears are still using those.
Yeah.
But when those stumps finally decay, there's nothing to replace them. So we have a bit of
Mm,
what we call successional debt, right? That we've
hmm.
logged this old growth forest. It's
Yeah,
still
for
actually
sure.
providing these values to us so
Hmm.
far, but there's no capacity to recover those values once they sort of attrition out
Yeah.
until the year 500 years from now, basically,
Yeah. Well, it's
potentially.
like you said here, like this is in, I think, Fairy Creek area
Hmm.
where, I
Hmm.
mean, which, I appreciate, the indigenous people and they have but it's, you cut down the trees and, okay, you have a bit of a windfall for a little while. And then what do then you have anything? You have to wait another, you're not going to wait another 150 years. And you just keep moving around the landscape. And then it's, yeah. And this is in Fairy Creek, which is all the talk, the past
Yeah,
year or two here.
right. Yeah, no, it's been a
Yeah.
huge sort of
Oops. Go
point
ahead.
of contention for sure.
I know. I know.
Yeah.
And then I just want to, yeah, jumping here too. I pulled this off your, I guess your website here, the BC
Hmm.
Government Old Growth Report Card. So, I mean, we look through here, and the provincial government, according to, I mean, I guess you guys and other advocacy groups, have given it, a kind of pretty much a D average, I think here, C's and D's, a couple of C's thrown in there. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, our feeling with the provincial government, and I think this is probably true of almost any government, is
Mm,
they are responsive, right? Like they are in the end accountable to us,
sure.
but they're a bit of a slacker, right? They want to do sort of the minimum they can
Mm,
to meet that to sort of quiet the hubbub, right? So we've
yes.
seen in the last few years enormous progress in the government's commitments. They
Hmm.
finally said, they've sort of pulled their ostrich head out of the sand and said, "Oh, there is a crisis on coal growth." We've been kind of shouting this into the abyss for about a decade, saying like
Right.
there is a crisis, and the government, successive governments, have said, "No, no, it's fine. There's tons of old growth." Finally, they've acknowledged it and they've committed to this change. But the problem is, every time they drag their feet,
Mm,
it's not like forests aren't falling right now. There are cedars like that one in that picture being cut down
yes.
like
Yeah.
today.
I
So
know.
we're dealing with this shrinking pool, and we're saying like, you guys got to move faster on this. I mean, I appreciate that you've committed, but the government's going to sit there and want to talk about this for 5 or 10 years. Well, these last messages kind of vanish. So
Yeah.
we see this window. We're actually probably in a once in a generational window where the
Mm,
government is moving, and we
hmm.
just want to push and get them over that line in a way that meets those commitments they've actually already made. We've got the
Yeah.
commitment, we've got the kind of the intention. We just need to, yeah. And this is an amazing picture. This huge
I
cedar,
know.
logged, you know, in 2020, right? Like we're no
I
other
know.
place, basically in the world, in the temperate world at least, is doing this. We are unique, and as you say, that kind of just
Hmm.
log it and get out, right? This kind of frontier mentality
Yeah. It doesn't make
that
sense. Yeah.
is inappropriate for this for
Yeah.
where it
I
was
mean,
always
like
inappropriate.
you said, as we're talking on this podcast right now, this is going on in the background. We have these
Exactly.
old growth trees, and
Yeah.
then 2 seconds later, we have this.
Yeah. And that tree, you get into I've been into some of these forests to be slated for logging, and you think this ecosystem has stood for centuries, right? These trees are
Yeah.
the contemporaries of Shakespeare or Charlemagne, or in
I
some
know, I
cases,
know, I know,
Jesus.
I
And
know.
it stood there. It's sort of been perfecting itself for these centuries. And in a single day, right? Like someone
Mm,
mowing the lawn,
I
all
know.
that is just extinguished. Like
Yeah.
it's very hard. It's not, I don't think there's a lot of dissonance I get even just being in there, because you can't believe that something that has been so permanent
Hmm.
can be so ephemeral that it could
Yeah.
just, you could take 1,000 years and just turn it to ash.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to think on it too, like, there's the book, was it Finding the Mother Tree as well, which
It's
is,
a
and
beautiful book.
there's
Yeah.
the wisdom. Like, you're talking about a 1,000-year-old tree, you know,
Hmm.
before any, there was just the indigenous people here, and the white man hadn't, nobody come on the West Coast here till like 150,
About
maybe
that. Yeah.
200, 150 years ago. And just the wisdom in these trees. And like you said, we're just cutting these guys down in, an hour or two, whatever it takes, and thousands of years of just history and wisdom and connection. The connection from a tree like this, a mother tree, to all the other trees around it, it went on for 1,000 years, and it was nurturing and sending nutrients,
Yeah.
and it has wisdom. That a tree of that has wisdom. And it's just, it's criminal. And we're just so, as a race, the human species, we're just so, blind and, I don't know, immature, or whatever we want to call ourselves, to this type of thing, what our planet can, produce for us in abundance, and we kill it
Hmm.
within, you know yeah.
Well, it's something I think oh, wow, those Doug firs, I don't even know where they are.
Well, that's
Those
actually,
pictures.
yeah, because my wife and I, we spend a lot of time in the bush,
Wow,
and we
those are
just like.
beautiful.
Yeah. So, okay, I tell you this, where this
Holy
is. I
mackerel.
know they're amazing. They're between Whistler and Pemberton, on a
No
on a
way.
single track bike path trail. Yeah. They're
Wow.
really, my friend Paul. I talk about Paul all the time on this podcast. My buddy lives at Whistler, and so we went for an amazing ride. It was about a 70-kilometer ride last summer in the heat. And then my wife and I went back, and we hiked it, like, and he took me to these trees. I was like, these are insane. I've
Those
never seen
are
anything like it.
those are
I
so
know.
incredible.
They're beautiful. And
Oh my
then, they're right
gosh.
beside the river, right beside the river. And so I went back with my wife, Reiko. We hiked in there
Hmm.
last summer, and we just kind of spent some time hanging out with these incredible,
Yeah.
just
And
these
Doug firs,
incredible,
those are like, from the
oh,
old growth perspective, the rarest. Like they were so
wow.
hammered so early on, like a giant Doug fir like that. That's like winning the lottery for us tree
Oh,
hunters.
I was
Like,
just, yeah, I know. Yeah, Reiko likes to go up and hug these old grandmothers. It's just like,
you
it's
just
just,
feel it. It comes
oh,
out. There is that spiritual connection you get, which is
it does.
profound. Like, yeah,
Yeah,
and if you just get in there, as you say, you see the difference. You see it's not a comparable
yeah,
ecosystem to what we replace it with.
yeah.
Wow, those
I
are
know, I know Ken,
incredible.
in our last chat with Ken,
Hmm.
he mentioned, like, the old growth trees, they give off some, I don't know what it was. They give off something that actually
Hmm.
brings more well-being, and
Yeah, these
cuts anxiety.
phytosides. Yeah,
Phytoside. That's what it's, a phytoside,
I
which
think it's a
I
phytocide.
never knew anything about that. I
I
had
might,
no
I might
idea.
that term. Ken has shared that with me, but I think it's
Yeah.
a phytocide, but I could actually be wrong. It's definitely phyto is the suffix, but of course that's not
Yeah,
too surprising. It's
I
just
was really,
bland.
I mean, I know, because Reiko's from Japan,
Hmm.
and I know in Japan they call it tree bathing, right? You go out and you
Mm.
spend time in the forest, and it helps your well-being, and your, if you're into meditation or whatever it is. But I mean, especially during these extremely interesting times we're going on here. We've gone through the pandemic of COVID, and now there's war, in Europe, and all this. People are stressed to the max, and the healing power of being in a forest. Second growth is okay, but
Hmm.
first growth, the power of being with a tree like this, it just centers you, and it just
For
brings you
sure.
back, grounds you, and really helps all of us with our health. And we're cutting these down, and it just drives me
Yeah.
crazy. Oh yeah, just drives
Well,
me
there's
crazy.
that way, I think, and you talk about sort of ancient wisdom, from,
Hmm.
say, like, if you read like an old, like a Taoist kind of text like Lao Tzu or Shuangzi, there's that kind of, it seems simple, of course, but it's actually very complex. Is that basic principle of doing by not doing, right? And we're
Hmm.
so fixated on this problem of the planet, right? We've got this world in crisis with global warming. And we're like, okay, what can we build? Can we build this great electric car? Can we do all these things to mitigate it? It's like, well, the greatest thing you can do is to not do. Like right now, we're destroying the very mechanisms that protect us. It's just do so much, right? Protect so much by not doing, by withholding your hand, right? Like by just letting something be, right? So logging just 1 hectare of old growth forest on the coast is like putting 100 cars on the road for a year. So
Whoa.
just by not doing that, right? Just by withholding our desire to affect it, we
Mm.
actually affect so much. And you feel that just by being with this tree, you feel all, as you say about its connections under the ground, right? Its mycorrhizal world that it is sort of sharing with its other trees.
Yeah.
It's doing so much, and we have the power to let it keep doing that, right? Let it keep
Yeah.
helping us, let it keep healing us. And
Yeah. And the
yeah, let
healing,
it.
like you said, the healing, and it's just like our survival is wrapped around these trees and the planet.
Mhm.
And I know Reiko and I, we were in Peru a few weeks ago and we were in northern Peru, and it was starting to get under my skin a little bit, driving me crazy that what we're doing to the planet, like we're killing the planet. And our good friend, he's a curandero,
Mhm.
a wisdom keeper, Andean wisdom keeper, Jamie Alvarez Acosta, and he's been on our podcast here. And I was like, Jamie, we have to do something. We have to save our planet. And Jamie said to me, he said, Nigel, like, it's our planet will be fine. Our planet will be fine. No matter what happens, our planet will regenerate. It's us as a human species. We may not be there or probably won't be there to see that if we keep on going the way we're going, destroying our planet. We're the ones that won't be there. Our planet will regenerate 1 billion years from now into something, whatever it is, but we won't be there because we're being so negligent with our planet. And it's true. Our survival as a species on this planet relies upon us preserving our natural world. And we're
Mhm.
doing a really shitty job at it.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, that got me all kind of all round up down there. But yeah, Jamie kind of hit the nail on the head there. Hey, well, we don't get our act together, we're not going to be here. So,
Yeah. No,
right,
it can be very clarifying those moments, right? To sort of
right,
see, okay, what is really at stake?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I
That's
know,
profound.
yeah. So I'm just going to click over here. Yeah, so I'm just going to back to here we go. Yeah, so that's great. So what we're going to do
Mhm.
is what Devin and I do is we always put the contact information and everything for everybody that we interview. And again, the reason that we started this Impact podcast is to highlight people and groups around the planet that are doing good and trying to help and make change, and real game changers. And your organization is one, and Ken, awesome guy. I mean, what he's been able to do over the years. I mean, he's put his blood, sweat, soul, everything
Yeah.
in it for 30
Ken's
plus years.
Ken's a dynamo.
Yeah, for
He's
there used to be
he's
the
just a.
Western Wilderness Committee,
Yeah.
and there's the Wilderness
Yeah.
Committee and the Ancient Forest Alliance and the Endangered Ecosystems. And then I saw that last week there was quite a lot of funds that went to protecting some areas. I saw it on the news. I can't remember what area it was, but a significant amount of money to help protect. So, little bits here. So, getting traction, but it's, another friend of mine, Lynn Twist, who is with the Pachamama Alliance she works with the indigenous tribes in the Amazon
Hmm.
to help preserve their way of life because they're the natural custodians of the
Yeah.
rainforest,
For
right?
sure. Yeah.
And I mean, one of the elders told me when I was down in the Amazon, he said, Nigel, could you just, when you go back, could you help talk and just help change the dream of the modern world? Just
Mm.
whatever that dream is, consumption, and we need more and more and
Hmm.
more. It's like help change the dream of the modern world. We need more balance, and we need more partnerships with indigenous
Hmm.
communities to, and the wisdom keepers to date back. So that's why we're doing this, and that's why we have people like yourself on that are so knowledgeable about why we need to protect this. And so thank you so much, Ian. I really appreciate what you're doing. Yeah.
Pleasure. Thanks so much for having me, Nigel, and a great conversation. It's wonderful to chat with someone who's so knowledgeable and so engaged already. Like normally we're sort of starting from, you know, point zero, but I mean, you're already so connected to your own
Wow.
ecological world on the North Shore, and just so
Well, I'm
knowledgeable.
learn,
So it's
I
been a
learn a
great.
lot because I'm talking to a lot of people like you, and I I really appreciate you guys doing all the work that you do, going to these in great universities and learning, and then getting out in the bush and actually doing the hands-on work, and bringing it back to to us that that either can't do it or whatever it is. And I really appreciate that. And that's, yeah, I've learned so much on this podcast, interviewing so many incredible people. And so yeah, well, thank you. And so it means a
Thanks,
lot.
Nigel. It's
Very
been a real
much to me.
pleasure.
Yeah.
I've had a blast.
Yeah. Okay, Ian, that's great. And where's my recording button?